video for the ending of the movie as well as the two different post-credit scenes. Make sure you stay through the entire movie if you haven't seen it yet. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. I do Easter eggs every week. We're getting ready for Game of Thrones Season 8, so it's going to be crazy tomorrow. And of course, careful for spoilers if you have not seen the Hellboy movie yet. So at the end of the movie, he stands victorious, he's defeated the Blood Queen, pulled Excalibur out of the stone, claiming his birthright as the right and true king of the British Isles. They make a joke about that later, like, yeah, I guess I am still king of England. You don't see the sword, so presumably he stuck it back in the stone, or it's in safekeeping so that no one else can try to use it. The sword Excalibur is crazy powerful. You only see a fraction of what it can do during the actual movie, and they really only used it in that nightmare sequence. I'll talk about that in a second. He throws the Blood Queen's head into the underworld before all the portals close, but she gives him this prophecy while she's going out that they're going to see each other again on the end of days, when the actual Armageddon prophecy comes true, the prophecy that he will lead about the destruction of the world. Before you get the post-credits, there's a bit of a time jump and they're on a new BPRD mission. Daimo is officially a member of the team, seemingly embracing his role a little bit more. Alice is with him. They go to take down an evil team of scientists that are experimenting on something. They don't know what, but when they barge in, they find what winds up being Abe Sapien's tank. So presumably if they continue with the franchise, they're just saying that Abe Sapien will join the team in the next film. But who knows if that's going to happen? I think it just depends on how the box office does. The story of Abe Sapien is actually pretty fascinating. They didn't really spend too much time on it in the original Hellboy movies, but he actually began life as a normal human called Langdon Everett Call. He was a Victorian-era scientist who was about 70 years old. He was a member of this occult society that believed life and all knowledge came from the sea. They found and rescued what they thought was a jellyfish-like deity from underwater ruins, but the creature escaped and used its magical power to turn Langdon Everett Call into the Abe Sapien that you see today. Then that society, believing that he was the reborn form of the deity that they worshipped, sealed his body in a tube. More than 100 years later, he was found by workers in 1978 performing work on the basement of a hospital. He was still in his tube. The reason why they named him Abe Sapien is because there was a piece of newspaper from the day that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. So technically his name is Abraham Sapien, but then that's when they took him to the BPRD and they experimented on him for a long time, till Hellboy felt sorry for him, convinced his father to put Abe on the team, and they became fast friends thereafter. They had a brief tutorial on the film about how exactly Hellboy is connected to King Arthur and how it was that his mother wound up marrying Azazel and giving birth to him down in the underworld. It's really crazy, but you have to understand that his mother was a witch that descends from Morgan Le Fay. Her name was Sarah Hughes. She came from a long line of witches that can trace their lineage back to Mordred and Morgan Le Fay. She married Azazel when she was 16. Remember, she's a witch. Azazel can give her power. He's very convincing, so it makes sense that if she was part of this supernatural world, that it'd be easier for her to fall in with Azazel. But you have to imagine in the background, he was sort of manipulating her because he wanted to bring about this prophecy that would lead to the apocalypse, the Ode to Jihad being released. The weird thing about Hellboy's birth, though, is that yes, she got married to Azazel and conceived Hellboy, but she didn't give birth to him till much, much later. So she was actually taken back to the earth. She wound up having 2 more children. They entered the clergy. Then as part of a deal with Azazel, as long as they could protect her from Azazel for 3 nights, his claim on her would be broken. He arrived on Earth, killed her human children, took her to the underworld, and then that's when Hellboy was born. So Hellboy was connected to King Arthur via Mordred, which is a much darker way to connect them, but King Arthur, Camelot, very tragic tale, so it makes sense that they would use that for the Hellboy backstory. The cool thing about Excalibur that they don't really get into during the movie, they just let you know that it has a lot of powers. He's sort of raising a bunch of demons using it, but you can also use it to call on the former knights of England. Anyone that's ever been a knight and died, you can raise up from the grave to fight for you. So imagine a giant army of undead knights fighting for Hellboy against the armies of darkness. The sword itself does continue to be a big thing in future Hellboy stories, so I don't know if they're going to bring it back in whatever sequel, but it exists, it's there, Hellboy's claimed it, so it's possible for him to use it again when necessary. But then you get to the mid-credit scene. So after a bit of the credits play, you get a scene with Hellboy at his father's grave getting drunk when all of a sudden the ghost of Lobster Johnson, who you saw earlier in the film, shows up to give him a pep talk, saying you did a great job in the battle, but now it's time to prepare for the war. He makes a joke about seeing the claw. I bet you want to see the claw. Everyone wants to see it. It's very tongue-in-cheek. You probably recognize Thomas Hayden Church. I think it was a great performance as long as you understood that it was supposed to be a little bit silly. Hellboy loses his shit, they cut to more credits, then in the final post-credits scene you see Baba Yaga again inside her special pocket dimension in her little chicken leg house on the mountain there, talking to a mysterious figure, asking him to take down Hellboy and give her the eye that Hellboy promised her in exchange for her help earlier in the film. That was why they did that really gross kiss between her and Hellboy to seal the deal. Why do you have hair on your tongue? A lot of people were confused about what's going on in this scene. The mercenary that she's speaking to on the other side of the table speaks with a really thick accent. It's probably Koshay the Deathless, a really badass killer whose soul she possesses and controls. That's why she says, "I'll grant your greatest wish if you're successful. I'll allow you to finally die." So that actually takes place during the Darkness Calls storyline, which they actually pulled from a little bit for the movie. They sort of combined a couple different Hellboy comic book arcs to make the plot of the movie. A little bit of the Wild Hunt and a little bit of Darkness Calls. The Koshay the Deathless storyline where he goes after Hellboy is during the Darkness Calls storyline though. So presumably that would either be the A or the B story for whatever sequel they do. And in terms of whatever big conflict they want to do, what they might do for the sequel is incorporate a little bit more of the Conquering Worm storyline, which they did a little bit of during the first Hellboy movie, where they try to unleash the Ogdu Jahad. The right hand of Doom is what his father grafted onto his hand. His father Azazel grafted the hand onto him so that Hellboy would be able to free the Ogdu Jahad on the world, unleashing the apocalypse. When Hellboy is confronted with Excalibur the first time and Merlin tells him, "Take the sword before it disappears," and he has the nightmare vision of what could come to pass, he's riding that huge dragon before he lands at the feet of the Blood Queen and starts eviscerating all the hordes of people. That's a bit of a wink at the Ogdu Jahad, although that dragon was not it. It's actually much, much larger. They did a much better version of it during that first Hellboy movie. But in the flashback, when they're explaining how he was summoned from the underworld, they do the version of his origin story. You see Rasputin captured by the authorities. He's presumably still alive. In the comics, Rasputin actually makes a bargain with Baba Yaga, who takes part of his soul, hides it in the World Tree so that he can never fully die, even if his body is destroyed. They also did a little bit of that during the first Hellboy movie, where they bring him back to life. But in Darkness Calls and future stories, you get a bit more of Baba Yaga versus Hellboy and her sort of using her crazy powers to try and take him down. Rasputin, Koshay the Deathless just wind up being pawns in her game to try and get him. So if it wasn't clear, they were trying to tell you that Baba Yaga is going to continue to be a really, really big Hellboy villain, although there's a lot of other really big mythological things going on in the background. They don't really get too much into their backstory during the film, but the whole reason why Baba Yaga lost her eye and hates Hellboy so much because of the previous encounters they had, they've actually run into each other a couple times, but the time that she keeps referring to is the first encounter that they had. That's when she lost her eye. Way back in 1964, Hellboy encountered her while investigating a string of missing child cases, so found out that Baba Yaga was stealing the children to eat them. They sort of pay reference to that during the film. You see all the little skeletal hands. So back in 1964, when Hellboy finds her while she's counting the fingers of a bunch of dead children in the cemetery, during the attack, she loses her left eye. It shoots right out. She curses the village that they're in. All the children wind up being born blind in one eye. But that's when her power diminishes and she gets trapped in that pocket dimension created in the image of her version of Russia as it appeared a long time ago. But within the recurring Hellboy stories, every once in a while, she is allowed to come back into our dimension. Once you have a chance to see the film, let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. Critics are ripping it apart, so I don't know how well it's going to do. There were a couple things that I thought it did well, but there's a lot of stories behind the scenes about drama between the director, the producers, the studio, so who knows what's going to happen with it. I guess we'll find out in the next couple of weeks. What's going to happen next is they're doing a panel for Star Wars The Mandalorian TV series that's going to be happening later this year. They'll release a trailer at that. If they put it online, I'll do a breakdown of it. And then obviously Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 1 is happening Sunday night. I'll post my video a little while after it airs. As long as you have alerts enabled for my channel, you'll see all the videos when I post them, so no worries. While you wait for everything, click here to get ready for Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 1, and click here to rewatch that Star Wars Episode 9 trailer. Thank you so much for watching.